My name is Jim Wilson. I'm the managing editor of Workplace Info. We're here to discuss future of work, AI, robotics, and workforce planning, and the results of our recent survey of HR executives. First of all, a slightly delayed start. We were a little bit delayed because of technological problems. Joining me today to discuss the survey and the general topic is Mary Sue Rogers. She is an independent HR consultant of 30 years experience with very well-regarded blue-chip global companies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, Talent2, and IBM. Also joining me is HR and IT expert David Gazzarotto. He is the CEO of Future Knowledge, and he has 20 years plus in the HR and IT industry. So without further ado, the format of today's webinar is going to be a short presentation on the results of our recent survey, and then we will be having a discussion with Mary Sue and David. And Mary Sue and David, if you feel you want to make any comments during the presentation, please do jump in.
It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, so a few bullet points just to see here. As you can see, there are some big global forecasts by the major consultancies. The first one I brought to your attention is 800 million workers to lose their jobs to robotics and AI and software and artificial intelligence by 2030, according to McKinsey. I'm just going to call them robots or AI or machines rather than elaborating every time. 47% of the US labor force is at risk of being automated out of a job, according to University of Oxford, 2013. In Australia, 40% of Australia's workforce could be replaced by automation within 20 years. That's CEDA. What does that mean in terms of people? 5 million Australians could be put out of work. So what we wanted to know, is the Australian HR industry ready for profound change? No, is the simple answer. We wanted to know, in the views of the Australian HR industry, how likely it is that Australian work will be automated and what kinds of jobs in Australia are most likely to be automated. So what will now follow is a presentation of the HR industry's perception versus reality. So we asked, in your opinion, how likely is it within 10 years that robotics, artificial intelligence, and software automation will be able to lower the overall demand for workers in Australia, change the type of jobs that the workforce does, or reduce the wages earned by the overall workforce? So as you can see in the first part of the graph on the left-hand side, the light purple, dark purple, and yellow bars, they're the more likely answers. So it seems the Australian HR industry overwhelmingly believes that the overall demand for workers in Australia is going to be lower than previously, although there's some degree of skepticism remaining. We'll make all the data available so people can pore over at their leisure. The Australian HR industry also believes that the type of jobs that the Australian workforce does will radically change overall. But the Australian HR industry does not believe, largely, that the overall wages of the Australian workforce will decline. David and Mary Sue, what do you think might explain their perception here of the workforce? Why do they think that the workforce demand will change and the type of jobs will change, but wages won't go down?
Well, I'd say one is us. We have to look at the environment in which we're in terms of how our HR professionals are used to working with awards and those sorts of things. So I can see a response from the HR community, which is linked to that, because we are a country where almost every single job class is on some sort of award. And so therefore, from a normal, it doesn't surprise me that HR professionals would say the rate per hour or the price you pay for labor wouldn't change, because the world they live in is one of awards and stuff like that. Yeah. So that doesn't actually surprise me as an answer. Mm-hmm. Now, whether they thought it through in terms of the economics of what happens, in terms of if I take this type of work and I replace it with a AI or robotics, and therefore then what sort of work do I need to continue to keep in the organization, and what rate do I need to pay for that work? Some of them should have maybe answered that the rate's going to go up because it's a different skill of worker and a different cost point for that worker from an awards perspective than even in today's market for somebody who might be doing a maintenance, higher skilled job versus somebody who's maybe picking something off the assembly line. So I think partly it's the world they're in and looking at it through different optics. And I would say probably it's I know what my award base is now. I can't see it changing because the government never drops the award base.
So a commission did recently, I suppose, with the penalty rates. David, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think to me, it's about this sort of distinction between the future of work and the evolving nature of work. So we hear a lot about future of work and digitisation, technology, AI, robotics having the impacts, but I'm not sure we're extending that conversation enough into talking about what that means for the nature of work. And that's a bigger, broader, more sophisticated conversation. I guess that talks to Mary Sue's point there around we're kind of constrained by the constructs and the economic infrastructure that's built around that. And so we've got this kind of tension between the two right now. I think we just perhaps need to step back a little and go, well, what is society going to look like, and how are we going to organise ourselves in all facets to be able to support the progression of the human race without wanting to overstate it. But it's a bit, I think that's the issue at heart now. We're a bit caught in this shift from the current world and the paradigms we've been in to a new way of organising that we don't 100% know how it looks yet.
Plenty of material for thought there. Okay, moving on. We also wanted to find out what HR executives believed technology was capable of, and we wanted to compare it to what technology actually was capable of. So we asked, within 10 years from now, how likely is it that workers in routine and repetitive jobs like administration, truck driving, fast food will be adversely affected by the new technologies? Yeah, and the response was, overall, the HR people believed these kind of jobs would be very likely, extremely likely, mostly likely, adversely affected. As you can see from the graph there on the left-hand side, the light purple, the dark purple, and the yellow are the more likely indicators. So there was about 527 responses, and there's about 400 or so responses indicating that the more routine jobs will be automated. I would suggest that is probably in line with reality. If you look at the Uber automated freight truck company, they're able to deliver beer now with automated trucks, which is a great boon for humanity, of course. And just putting that in a workplace context, and this is workforce planning, there are 173,000 employed truck drivers and 46,000 delivery drivers in Australia, according to the federal government's job outlook. Other jobs, fast food workers. So the picture on the right is Flippy. He's a new robot. He's been deployed earlier this month or last month in a restaurant, fast food restaurant in California. As the name suggests, it flips burgers. And the funky looking pair of arms on the left are robots that are about to go on sale, and you can buy these for your kitchen. It's a pair of automated arms. It hangs down and will make you gourmet food. Yours for, I think, £30,000, which is about $60,000 Australian. I'll put my name down for that. Now, you can imagine, for instance, that might be deployed in a workplace context in a care home, perhaps, anywhere they've got to serve large amounts of food. And you can just imagine on an amortizing basis, if you're employing a chef, I don't know how much chefs are paid, but let's say they're paid $60,000 a year. You've got to pay the chef $60,000 a year every year, and then you've got to have more than one chef, overtime rates, sickness, other issues. The robot just sits there. So over a 2 or 3, 4, 5 year period, it's going to be massively cheaper. Putting that in context, you can see from the numbers there, I won't add them up for you, but you can see all the cooks and chefs and food trade assistants and kitchen hands, waiters and waitresses, all the prep workers. I grabbed this data from Jobs Outlook. It's something like 347,500 jobs overall, potentially under threat from automated food prep working robots. So get back on. David and Mary Sue, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to discuss around there. So, I mean, first of all, I think we have to challenge the whole notion that jobs are being replaced. Like, I think it seems to me like the debate is getting very binary here. Mm-hmm. You're in a job that is easily automated, whether that's a tactile job or a knowledge worker job. I don't think it's as simple as we're going to replace those jobs. I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see human augmentation. And I think we should be thinking more about how we're going to coexist with the technologies, be it the artificial intelligence, the robotics, but still bring those essential human traits to the table. So I think it goes back to what I said originally, the nature of work is going to change, informed by the technologies and the impact of those technologies. Those technologies are going to be there. They're driven through a desire to derive some economic advantage, whether that's enhanced productivity, whether that's to reduce risk and safety issues and the like. Fundamentally, what that does is it pushes the human into higher value tasks and activities. And I think history has shown that every time there's been some sort of a shift in or some sort of progress made, technologically or otherwise, it's pushed the value of the worker higher. So the fact that we're going to lose a whole bunch of kitchen hands is actually a good thing. What might that do? I don't think it'll take the waitresses and waiters around. It'll put a higher purpose on the customer service piece, where the human interaction layer is actually going to add some value to that organisation or that experience. So I think that's a big part of it as well. Do you agree with that, Mary Sue?
No, I think it's a really good point. I would totally agree with the augmentation point, because it isn't an entire job. Most likely will not disappear. So take your burger flipping one, right? There isn't one person who works at McDonald's that all they do all day for 8 hours is flip burgers. They do other things. They might wait some time on the counter. They might do some other activities. They put lettuce and tomato on a bun, whatever it is they might do as part of the job. So the augmentation of pieces of work versus an entire job, I think, is much more with the scenario what's going to happen. I also think, and this is maybe where the HR professionals need to play a stronger game, is understanding return on investment. Because you talked about the price of your gourmet chef person at 30,000 could be able to do that. In order to be able to come up with the business case of will that truly produce a return on investment, I think the HR professionals need to get better at understanding the trade-offs and building out the business case and understanding, is it the whole job, part of the job, or whatever. So I think that's another point in looking at that augmentation point of where do you get the value out of it. And I think the other point, which I think is really worth exploring as we go through this, I think one of the bigger challenges here is legal. So you talked about aged care and having somebody cook for them. Who will be responsible if the robot accidentally gave mother high salt when she shouldn't have it and she died? Whose fault is it? Is it the robot's fault? Is it the person who programmed the robot? Is it the care home because they didn't do the quality testing on the robot? So it's not that you can't do it. I think there's going to be a huge amount of risk and other factors that go around it, which say, do you want to do it? When do you want to do it? And if you do it, how do you assure that the quality is not going to get me into trouble as a company? And that's where boards and other organizations, other parts of the ecosystem around the company are actually going to start playing bigger roles.
It's an really interesting point. You use the driverless truck example before, Jim. We've had an issue this week, right?
In Arizona.
So Uber's testing car crash pedestrian fatality, and that just brings to light how early days we are with this stuff. I mean, as much as the technology can do this stuff, to Mary Sue's point, there's a whole bunch of other stuff we've got to construct to enable this technology to perform to anywhere near the level of what the humans are doing today. And I think that whole societal impact piece too. If we're going to program a car to behave in a way that a human might otherwise have done, how are they going to grapple with the decision to either save the driver from a crash into a bus? Do we divert the car away from the 40 school kids in a bus to save the driver? Where's the AI kick in there? And what do we want that program to be? This programming to be like, it's a really, there's a whole bunch of ethical and legal concerns that I don't think we've even scratched the surface on yet. We're, because the excitement, the interest, the investment's all in the technology. We want to push, but we're going to need to think this stuff through.
Certainly not an ethical decision I would want to be responsible for, that's for sure. Going back to your earlier points, it's quite interesting because in relation to task augmentation and replacement, there are examples on both sides. If you go down to the ports in Australia, for instance, you'll find in the container ports, the majority of the human labourers have been eliminated from the ports themselves, and they've been replaced by robots. But that is a very controlled environment. So AI, as it currently stands, can be, and machines can be deployed quite safely in those environments. And then if you turn around to task augmentation, as a journalist, I can certainly testify to this myself. There are companies out there that are producing sports reports and earthquake reports and financial reports, no human beings involved. The data's plugged straight into the computer writes the story, it's published, no human beings involved. So there's good examples on all different aspects there. You're right, I think, David, where you say we're thinking of it as binary, but we probably should be thinking of it as spectrum. Knowledge-based workers, okay, people overwhelmingly, and people by this I mean HR executives, believe knowledge workers, lawyers and doctors and engineers. I'll leave that to the industry experts to decide. That I'm a mere humble journalist. won't be replaced by AI and or robotics. And this seems to be a very strongly held view. There's a fairly high feeling of not at all likely. So knowledge work won't in any way be adversely affected. Now, in my view, that's not right. And the reason why is plenty of examples of that happening in progress today. We have a robot here in a contract in JP Morgan's Coin. COIN is an acronym for a contract checking system. JP Morgan are getting artificial intelligence to check contracts and making sure all the contracts are valid. This, I think, goes really to Mary Sue's point where we're talking about tasks. Certain tasks are being done. There's another good example of that. Bowen Leighton Pazer, which is a large international UK law firm, and Ravin Cognition, which is a software company. They've created an AI system that can scan hundreds of thousands of documents. So when large law firms are engaged in large-scale litigation, they do a process called discovery. And discovery is they basically get teams and teams of young paralegals, lock them in a room with lots of contracts and documents, read them and produce a report. Teams of paralegals taking weeks. The software can do it in minutes. Smart Settle, Eustace, and eBay, these are all examples of AI systems. eBay, of course, is the well-known marketplace. They strike deals with each other, often being done by artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence says negotiate with each other and strike a pricing point, and the dispute is settled. eBay does millions a year. The Fair Work Commission Australia is actively investigating this technology now. They want to apply it to unfair dismissal cases. I forget the exact numbers, but there are many, many tens of thousands of unfair dismissal cases. Many of them settle for relatively small amounts of money, and the Fair Work Commission wants to have artificial intelligence take that workload from them. So is law automatable? And I'm picking on law here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's because as somebody trained as a lawyer, I do have a bit of an understanding. And also there's plenty of examples. Legal work is drafting, research, advocacy, advice, interviewing, and negotiation, if you were to boil it down to its essentials. Drafting is, there are software companies that can do legal drafting for you. HRA, a sister product of Workplace Info, can do that for you. I've mentioned a few different research types of software. There's another one called Ross Intelligence Legal Research, and that will research precedents for you. Advocacy and advice. Advocacy can be done on the papers. You submit papers to the courts. DoNotPay.co.uk. This is a UK-based AI. It successfully resolved 250,000 disputes to date over parking fines. No lawyers involved, no human beings. Now, there's been
Can I
something.
jot that URL down?
Yeah, sure. DoNotPay.co.
Okay.
How about savesdavidsparkingfees.com? So DoNotPay.uk, they've resolved something like 250,000, and they've taken on 350,000 cases. So they've got a 2 out of 3 success rate. Interviewing, now many lawyers just believe the emotional angle of handling legal disputes can't be resolved by any kind of computer. We'll touch on that later. And negotiation, as I just mentioned, eBay used this Smart Settle. They can negotiate and strike deals. So there's 76,100 lawyers in Australia. I remember quizzing one of the Fair Work commissioners on this point, and I said, with these new technologies, is that going to reduce the scope for young lawyers to learn, train, and upskill? And he said, absolutely. Back in the day, clients would pay effectively for the training of young lawyers. And a lot of this technology is going to remove the ability of law firms to do that anymore. Mary Sue and David, do you have any views on how the advent of the new technologies is going to affect the ability of companies generally to pay, train, and upskill their young workers when a lot of this grunt work, shall we call it, is being taken by computers?
I think if you look at knowledge workers overall, rather than just honing down on the legal profession, I think that HR professionals in the organization need to sort of look at what the entry-level roles are. So part of the premise goes back to what is an entry-level position? Is an entry-level position for somebody who's an aspiring CPA to come in and do tick and bash and go through and do audits and learn all of that through the old-fashioned sort of, the rite of passage under an accountant. And is that no longer, if that no longer is an entry-level job because it can be automated or because it can apply other intelligence to it, what is the right entry-level role? Because the whole definition of entry-level is about acquiring the base skills to be able to then move and help with the rest of the organization. If you automated all that and you don't really need anybody who knows how to tick and bash, maybe you just need to have somebody who knows how to QA that, and that's the entry-level position, or somebody who knows how to spot check things, or somebody who knows whatever it might be. So I think HR needs to go back and redefine what is that entry-level, not position would be important, but also the skills and competencies that are entry-level skills and competencies, because I think they might shift, or they will shift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think the general question is more automatable. Absolutely, right, for all the reasons we discussed. It goes back to this evolution again and how we can make the case to leverage the new ways of working. To Mary Sue's point, I think entry-level jobs are the biggest risk here, and I think there's a massive societal risk to that as well. So I've been in my keynote speaking, I've been putting a call to action to HR leaders, and I'll do it to this audience as well right now. We are at risk of having a lost generation right now, and I'm particularly passionate about it because I've got 3 kids who are in this lost generation, right? The youngest of my kids will do their HSC in 2029. We'll come into a workforce that will be markedly changed from what it is today at a rapid rate. And the question in my mind is, are we actually supporting, is the education system moving fast enough to enable the skill sets that are going to be required for the new types of work? You know, if I look at the cohort that my son's in, just in year 7 this year, you can see the kids that are on the path to, I'm going to do law at university, I'm going to do, science. It's probably not a great example because I think science will be very predominant. But you know, that pathway may not exist in 7 years' time or 10 years' time. How are we going to re-engineer what we do from the systems around and the structures from an education system perspective? So the call to action that I put out to HR leaders is, let's start looking at the way we organise work in your organisations today. Let's make sure that we continue to provide those entry-level positions. That if we are looking to automate that layer, then the risk is we're not going to have the quality of workforce that we require at those higher levels, because we're going to push the knowledge and skill sets up to higher levels in organisations and not have any sort of entry-level jobs to feed into that over time. So it's a topic we could run an entire podcast webinar on that topic alone. Probably require a bit of red wine with it. But
I'll take you up on that.
Let's do whatever we can to I guess address the future of work and make sure that my kids are coming into a workforce where they can be productive. And
The societal aspects are fascinating. I mean, looking at the current workforce debate in Australia, David and Mary Sue, it seems to be revolving around such topics as penalty rates, casualisation of the workforce, wage rates, work security, the potentially changing the rules of the industrial relations system. All important, fascinating stuff. And now, but we're not anything about the future. And it seems to me the bigger, more profound changes is this future of work in which we have a very automated world. Why are we not debating this on a national level? Why are our politicians not addressing it? Why are they fighting now over 10%, 15% changes to penalty rates and potential casualisation of the workforce? Why are we not looking at something that has the potential to remove the entry layer of jobs for all our young people?
I'll grab a quick point on this, but this is Mary Sue's world, so I'm gonna let her talk to it in more depth. But the reality is, we've got, as we said, the nature of work's changing. If I look at my kids and what they want to be doing and what they're saying they want to do, they're not actually looking for the 40-hour-a-week job. They're going, I want to be paid to play cricket. I want to run a lemonade stand. The way that they're defining work is the context within the world around them. And I think we need to kind of look at that and go, having the gig economy predominate and allowing individuals to chart whatever it is they want to do based on a sense of purpose they have or how they want to contribute, to be paid in various ways for that so they can sustain the lifestyle they want. I think that's where we're headed. We're mired in this somewhat economic and political construct right now that's pushing everyone back into these models of work. That's kind of what I'm sensing. This is not, I don't have the deep expertise that you have in this space, Mary Sue.
Well, I think part of it with the government is that, one is, by definition, they're politicians, so they're trying to get reelected or whatever it might be. But I do think we have some more systemic things in Australia that we need to think about. One is, each state does something slightly different, whether you take workers' comp or you take whatever. Each state, for the number of workers there are in this country, a more unified approach in terms of how they do things and doing them once might not be a bad thing in terms of the government looking at stuff rather than, because it's not going to be driven from a federal perspective, but it's the states, it's a lot of states' responsibility. If you look at New South Wales, there are a lot of things going on in New South Wales that are trying to do it, whether it's apprentice programs, whether it's grants going into training up young women to go into non-traditional fields. I mean, there's lots and lots of spot solutions to be able to support some of that. What I think there isn't is more of that overall arching strategy and from the government in terms of how to address both the desire. Why is it that somebody wants to be a gig worker? Well, you know, and I don't have a mortgage, I don't have any car payment, I don't have this, I don't have that, so I don't really need to have money come in every month. So some of the historical drivers that forced people to go take what we would all consider probably a more traditional background. I leave university, I do an entry-level job, I earn skills and money, I grow up and become a manager, blah, blah, blah. The overall drivers for a young person coming out of university right now to do that are not necessarily there the way they were 20 years ago. So there's sort of those aspects versus the millennial generation and what they want to do, the gigs, or I'll go to a startup rather than work for somebody because I want to be more flexible with my time. And then there's government intervention in terms of how do I support all this with being able to build skills and competencies with the people. And I don't think it's actually jobs. I think it is skills and competencies. It is about understanding what are the competencies that are going to sustain into the future, whether that's numeracy, whether that is communication skills, whether that's taking and really building those foundation skills so that people can pack and unpack them as they go in terms of building out, whether that's a bricklayer, because you have to know how to communicate to your boss or the customer, or whether that's a lawyer who needs to know financially how they bill their client because they kept their timesheets right.
Absolutely.
Marissa, I've got another question specifically for you. It came from one of our audience in our pre-registration. Now, I understand you're particularly expert in the topic of mentoring young women into the workplace and developing future leaders who are female. We've been asked, how will AI and robotics and the new technologies affect the increased participation of women in the future of workforce planning?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure AI and robotics is actually going to up the participation of women. I mean, obviously women could choose to go down that as a technical career and understand it and that sort of stuff, so the STEM activities and things like that. But as itself, I'm sort of struggling a little bit and thinking about how that actually could do that, because it's more about the ecosystem around it. It's about how biased are people. So if you're still reading a CV of somebody and you can see their name and everything else and you have a bias against hiring a certain type of person, AI and robotics is not going to get rid of it unless your company has deemed to use AI and robotics to be able to de-bias applications, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think the technology by itself is going to do it. It's more about the companies having, and government having, an approach in terms of what are best practices for eliminating bias in the workforce, what is the best practice for being able to ensure pay equity, and those things are not going to come about because technology can help them get there faster, but it's certainly not going to fix the problem. The problem is on two legs.
Yeah, there's another angle on that too. I think we're putting a very high price right now on STEM. Like there's Rob Stokes was in the media this morning. He's talking about too high a focus on STEM at the expense of some of the broader educational opportunities that we should be driving. And I think this talks to this as well. We're trying to push STEM as a pathway for greater female participation in the workforce, ostensibly, right? It's a bit, I think there's more to it than that, but there's an element of that in there. But if you think through, if technology is going to replace a lot of this work, then why are we pushing people into more of the technology-driven focus when the human aspect's actually going to become more predominant? So the fact that women generally have been contributing to more human-centric work, types of work, I don't think we should lose sight of the importance and increasing importance of those focus areas. So I'd almost be saying we need to push a broader contribution to the more human-centric types of work, like teaching, nursing, those very important drivers for society as well.
Again, fascinating material. It's not immediately the first thing I would have thought of is the increased, gender diversity as a result of AI. I'm glad you mentioned human-centric. One of the topics we surveyed was human-centric related job types and AI. So creative workers, so I think we can agree that creative type work is a human type work.
Yeah.
So we asked again, how likely is it that AI, robotics, and the new technologies could adversely affect creative workers of all kinds? And HR executives overwhelmingly believe creative workers, and the examples we gave, artists, journalists, musicians, won't be replaced by AI, robotics, or adversely affected. And as we can see the graph on the screen there, overwhelmingly not at all likely. Just a few shy under 400, and there was about 527 responses, and then somewhat likely was pretty high too. And again, here's a little pop quiz for everybody watching. There are 6 pictures of some very dour looking chaps. And I've deliberately picked them to all look pretty similar. These are all paintings by the master, Rembrandt. Or are they? One of them was done by a robot. Can you identify which one? David, care to take a guess? And I'll give you a clue. It's got nothing to do with the high res or the low res or the jagged angles or anything, because I scraped them off the interwebs. Mary Sue, any thoughts? Let's see if we can get a valid reason rather than picking at random.
Top right.
Top right. What's the reason for that one?
It's the least attractive one to my eye. It's like a robot.
Very good. Mary Sue?
I would say the one middle and the bottom, because the aspect of the size of the space of his arm and body are slightly.
Okay. Right. Well, would you like to know the answer?
Yeah,
Sure.
we're both wrong.
Both wrong, and both of your reasons are completely invalid. The real computerized Rembrandt, the new Rembrandt, you can look it up. I think the website is Next Generation Rembrandt, is top left.
Right.
That is the computerized Rembrandt. So what the researchers did here, just to prove is conceptually, they went and photographed and scanned as many Rembrandts as the museums would allow them to do. And they programmed it in the computer and then just got it to paint and paint and paint. And eventually it came up with a new Rembrandt. Good enough to fool. Are there either you, by any chance, art experts?
Nope.
Certainly able to fool the average
Not
person.
experts.
Certainly able to fool the average person. Okay, I picked a bit of a light-hearted topic there, but there's plenty of examples of creative robot work. I mentioned one before, journalists, which has expanded the nature of work, and it's even able to do work you wouldn't have thought a robot would be able to do. For example, robots can write obituaries of people, and I would never have guessed that. Data-driven stories, yes, I could see that. And there are also robot musicians. You can get robot graphic design artists.
Most of the music my kids listen to is robotic musicians, as far as I'm concerned.
Very mechanical. I think the topic of intergenerational equity might be you'll want to get your opinion on next time. All right, so moving on. Empathy workers. Now, robots don't have emotions. Emotions are a function of the limbic brain in your brain, and specifically the mammalian brain. So robots can't do empathy jobs. We all know this, right? Well, of course, you know that's wrong. Meet Ellie. She's an AI therapist. She's, as the words say there, an interactive virtual agent-based healthcare dissemination delivery system. She's a robot. She's an AI system. And she can recognize and identify your psychological distress and respond to it appropriately. How it works is they have a camera focused on the person who is in distress, and it matches, the AI system matches the face, the muscle movements, the tone of voice, the rate at which the person speaks, and programs it, checks it against its program. The US military is also developing similar systems with the University of Southern California, Staff Sergeant Chen. And Chen can train, can mentor, can role play, can help train and lead people. So are we surprised at all that AI and robotics and moving into the area of empathy-related jobs?
I don't think I'm surprised. I think the technology continues to, I mean, we'll always aspire to push technology to other places. I think the fundamental question here is, do we actually want / need technology to replace humans for that sort of activity? So if you go back to your creative one, I would argue that from the moment, Indigenous artists were using very primitive tools to put paintings on caves, which we still appreciate today and was meaningful to them in those days. Over time, we've evolved to various technologies, from paintbrushes to, different mediums and all sorts of things. I think fundamentally that goes back to the human augmentation. The tools got better so that the artists could create in different ways and evolve their, the way in which they told the stories. And I think, if a creative person becomes someone who programs a robot to paint something, it's still a human activity, and it's still supporting the creative side. And I think this is the key to it, where we've got to stop thinking about replacing human work with robotic work. We've got to see, how do we assimilate the robotics and the technologies with human society? Because if you go further and you look at what happened with society through those technology shifts, and it's where the technology shifts have been the greatest, that there's these monumental points in time. The ancient Greek civilizations, where arts were very predominant, basically because they were able to get so much economic activity going on to support a patrician style, the funding for arts and the creative pursuits became a really important thing above and beyond survival. Renaissance is another example of that as well. Maybe we're heading into another Renaissance here, where technology is taking a lot of the stuff that's distracting us from the more, self-actualized, higher purpose human activities. We might be going back to seeing the world, full of poets and painters supported by wealthy patricians.
Sounds ghastly. Mary Sue, any thoughts?
I thought David's answer was really good there in terms of it is what we can do versus what we want to do.
Correct, yeah.
And I think there's going to be lots of things we can do as society, as technicians, as whatever. But do we want to do it? And is it legal to do? Right? So you take your Rembrandt example. Is it illegal to actually go and use a computer to create a Rembrandt or a dollar bill, or set up a dark web to be able to hold me for ransom on my database, right? So there's lots of ways. Very creative. Yes, very, very creative. And so there's we can do things. Do we want to do them, and are they legal to do? And I would argue that in some of these things, in terms of, if I had somebody in a care home, I would not want a robot. I would be willing to pay a premium for my loved ones to be taken care of by somebody who is going to be much better for them to deal with, empathize with, or whatever. So I think you might find some things in terms of ROI, going back to that, and premium pricing in the marketplace and what I'm willing to pay for and stuff like that. But it'll all go back to the business case around it. But at the end of the day, I do think those sorts of things will more likely happen from the ecosystem around more knowledge and empathy workers. It'll be in that, where's the trade-off? Am I willing to pay a premium? Yes, we can do it. Do we want to do it? And what do I feel comfortable with in society of doing? All you have to do is look at Facebook right now and all the stuff going on with Facebook and saying, are people going to feel comfortable sharing that level of information in the future if that's what happens with it? And so I think we are on a cusp about can versus want or need.
The conjecture too around when talking about the empathy piece and the full extent of human, the capacity of the human brain, the consensus is we're 80 years away from artificial intelligence being able to surpass what the human brain can do. And I think that's an important point to make, that the things that are inherently human are still going to be the things that we want society to be built around. And so we're probably not going to be seeking robots to replace that stuff. It's to take on the things that don't add the value that the humans can, so that we can spend more time doing the inherently human stuff, which is the business case argument.
Fantastic, fascinating views, and there are examples on all different sides there. I can think, for instance, it's not on my presentation, there was, on the past tense, an anaesthetist robot, and if you look purely on paper, you would want to be anaesthetized by this robot when you went through a surgery, because the health outcomes are better, you suffered less infection, in every possible way it was just better. And the company that making them had to give up and stop selling them because no one was buying them, because no one wanted to be anaesthetized by a robot. And Mary Sue, you're laughing. I can feel, I think to myself, would I want to be
one either?
Or what if someone hacks in? On the converse side of that, Ellie is particularly interesting. When they did studies on Ellie, the people who were psychologically distressed actually opened up more to Ellie, a robot, than they did to human therapists. and they revealed more information, more truthful information to Ellie than they did to human therapists. Particularly interesting, I was thinking in terms of future workforce and composition of the workforce, and particularly workers' compensation and health. Mental stress, mental illness as a result of the workplace is a big problem in Australia. You can see here, puts a couple of statistics. 14 billion a year, apparently, it costs Australian workplaces. 45% of the Australian population will experience mental illness, according to Sane Australia. The drivers of short-term employee absence, 28% mental ill health, stress, depression, anxiety. Drivers of long-term absence is 66%, is again mental health. And between 2015 and 2016, 51% of organisations report an increase in levels of absence because of mental health. And that's Direct Health Solutions. They're the leader in absence management and absence statistics reporting. It strikes me that if we could have more Ellies of various kinds and helping people in the workplace to manage the stress, then surely this could only be a good thing. But I will leave that thought there, unless either of you would like to comment.
Oh,
stunned into silence.
I was going to be slightly cynical about the level of. I think this needs to be combined with the robotics and AI that solved workers' comp claims and put the two together. So.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, we've got to be careful that the solutions are not the problems, right? Because how much mental health and stress is being caused, by me waking up 5 times a night and checking my phone to see if there's any important emails come through, or being distracted by things. And I think there's a whole lot of conflicting stuff we could probably discuss around this.
Yeah, any one of these topics I think would take a week's worth of webinars. We're looking at an overview. Okay, great. These are 3 robots, 2 of which you could actually buy. Pepper now and Romeo. So Pepper is actually being deployed in Belgian hospitals. He's a Japanese robot, and he will give you advice and chat to you in a happy way about where your loved ones are as they're suffering various maladies. The red robot, I believe, is now, and he is being deployed, amongst other things, help people with autism in France. And Romeo, at the far right-hand side, is a robot that's somewhat conceptual at the moment, but is being developed by SoftBank in Japan. All these are Japanese robots by SoftBank. And Romeo is designed to be of a certain size and height to help elderly people navigate around their homes, to help them stay in their homes, and will chat to elderly people. It will be able to take items off the table, give it to the elderly person, open doors for the elder person, climb stairs, and so on. So potential augmentation of the future healthcare workforce.
Yeah. It's kind of sad though.
Well, we probably need to pay healthcare workers more and recruit them more and encourage them to.
But where should care be, right? Care's something that's fundamental, human to human. What are the people who are connected to those humans that are being cared by robots? What are they doing? Sitting on the beach in Bondi, enjoying their lives while a robot's taking care of their loved ones? I mean, that's.
It's just the way the human brain is, I guess. I mean, lots of people. The funding of elderly and aged care is a big problem. Yeah, it costs a lot of money.
So again, where we can use it to augment, and goes back to the business case, I think these are all arguments pointing to the same things, aren't they?
So I've come up with a couple of conclusions here from my non-expert view. Robots and artificial intelligence are far more capable than most people realise, and it seems reasonable to think that they could have a very adverse impact. We've heard differently from our 2 experts. Any concluding comments on anything so far?
I do think that if we've touched on it, you have to look at all of this in context of it's augmentation, it's not complete jobs. It's looking at what is the return on investment, because no one's going to let anybody go buy 20 robots unless there's a return on it in the hospital, because it does A, B, and C and there is a return. So it might look interesting and sound interesting, but the business case is going to have to be there. The complex legal and regulatory environment, I think, has just barely been touched on. Everybody's enamored by self-driving cars, but who do you sue when you got? You're not going to sue the car. You're going to sue the self-driver, which is invisible. You're going to sue the passenger because they were actually in the car. I mean, what happens? And particularly when you're in more litigious societies such as the United States, that's going to be, I think, one of the bigger challenges, and probably going to be the forefront of what it happens there. And so I do think those are sort of in conclusion, is not just technology has always been an enabler, and this is just another enabler. It may be a little bit more complex, but from an HR professional's perspective, I think we need to take ourselves up more to the workforce strategic level and really understand those points of, can we make money out of it? Does it make sense for our business? Is it our customers going to pay for it? You know, in terms of what's there, and have I managed the risks and looked at the legal and statutory requirements around it, which is, you know, that's what we as HR professionals need to be doing.
And I think your point there about it being reasonable to think there's a very adverse impact too. You've got the wrong people in the room here.
I've got the right people.
Like that, right? But it's actually very reasonable for people in those 350,000 jobs you've identified, and people who families and socioeconomic conditions where they aspire to work in those roles and are going and feeling threatened. It's a very reasonable thing to think, I'm going to be adversely impacted. And I think it's important that the conversation is taken, like the conversation's about what the technology can do, not how do we manage more broadly the impact of what that's going to do, which talks to your summation there too, Mary Sue. That's fundamental to this. I think it's absolutely reasonable for people to feel threatened, and I respect that.
Okay, and then to wrap up, just as a short couple of lines, obviously our audience are HR executives. What does this mean for the HR function and the HR professional's role? And how do HR people make sure that, you know, if they feel threatened, they stay in jobs?
I think the most at threat role in organisations right now is HR managers, realistically. So I'd be thinking this through more broadly from an existential perspective. Reality is most HR teams are focused on very repetitively cognitive work themselves and administrative work. And so I think the challenge for HR leaders is to think more strategically and to connect more with what, you know, where technology is impacting their businesses and their workforces, and work collaboratively with all, you know, all of the actors in that to try and, you know, frame the nature of work differently.
Mary Sue, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I would totally agree. I think from an HR professional's perspective, I think they need to spend more time understanding what is the work content that I have now in the future? What's the source of supply of that? Is it a full-time permanent worker? Is it a gig worker? Is it a contractor? Or is it a robot? You know, because you've got a whole choice here of what you can do. And really working with the leadership team and helping them make the decisions of what they want to do, which drives around what does the customer want, what financially can we afford, and what is our culture and our environment of what we're trying to create in terms of how we staff and fill roles in the future.
Fantastic. So I'd like to conclude at that point. So
there's no one left now anyway, because the HR audience has just gotten
ready for dinner, for lunch. So I'd like to thank Mary Sue Rogers for her time and expertise, and also David Gazzarotto for his time and expertise. David is the CEO of Future Knowledge. Mary Sue, you can contact her at her website, safehr.com. Mary Sue and David, we're very honoured to have you here, and you know, I'm sure the audience have benefited greatly from your experience and expertise. To all the audience, thank you for tuning in. We will be following up with a report you can read, along with a series of articles, and we've recorded the webinar. So if you've been unable to listen, there are often technological problems at internet connectivity. We will have a replay that you can access any time you like. Once again, thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.